Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin the event proper, we would like to share a short video with you. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video.
Fear grips her world of darkness, alone and ignored. She threads through the unknown. She is an outsider in a strange, dark place. An army of evil eyes descends upon her. They seize her spirit with their menacing gaze. She falters, paralyzed with fear. In her weakest moment, a tree emerges. She is rescued by its embrace, shielded from the surrounding madness. She ventures forth, deeper into the darkness. Lost and lonely in the wilderness, she encounters a band of friendly gnomes. The gnomes show her the way of the woods. As they part ways, they tell her of a magic door that will lead her out of the darkness. The girl makes steady progress, more confident than before. Empowered by the wisdom of the gnomes, she finds the magic door. As determined as she is, she cannot go on. A fairy appears and hands her a magic key. The girl finally emerges out of the dark forest. Now empowered with love, knowledge, and strength, her journey continues. Now she believes, just as others had believed in her.
You're my peace, you're my song, you're my shelter from the storm. I was lost before I met you, now I'm home. You're my dream, You're my soul, you're my king when I grow old. And I promise that you'll never be.
I am pleased to inform you that you have been awarded the VR Nathan Bursary for AY 2016 and 17.
Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to our NUS Giving webinar series. On behalf of the NUS Development Office, I would like to thank you all for joining today's session, Pay It Forward Conversation. We hope you enjoyed the video. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items to maximize your enjoyment in today's event. Please double-click the main screen to pin the video. You are joining this event in listening mode only, so please keep your microphones muted during the dialogue session to prevent any disturbance. During the dialogue session, if you have any questions for our speakers, please type them into the chat box and we will bring it up during the discussion. Please also note that we will be recording this webinar. Thank you. I'm Janelle, a Year 4 Law and Liberal Arts student at Yale NUS College and a recipient of the Yale NUS Global Leader Scholarship. Receiving the scholarship has enabled me to pursue my own passion in psychology and law, and I'm immensely grateful for this scholarship, which has allowed me to attend university by lifting the financial burdens that would otherwise be placed on my family. One of the things I have been actively involved in college life is to give back through volunteering and community service. In my first year at Yale NUS, I joined an organization called Compact, a Yale NUS student-run organization that aims to help make community service opportunities readily available for college students and to the wider college community as well. Through this organization, I have tutored and mentored at-risk youths and have been inspired by my tutees' diligence and resilience, which is why I continued with the project under a new program called the Impart program as well. I hope to eventually be able to work in an industry that allows me to pursue both my passions for law and psychology, and also in the context of community service. Well, enough about me now. Today, we are pleased to have with us two distinguished speakers who will be sharing their personal stories on how the generosity of others has transformed their lives in numerous aspects, and how the impact of philanthropy continues to influence and benefit them and the people around them as well. First up, we have Professor Walter Woon, currently a David Marshall Professor at the NUS Law Faculty and concurrently Dean of the Singapore Institute of Legal Education. Next, we have Mr. Muhammad Faisal, presently serving as the Deputy Chief Prosecutor and the Senior State Counsel at the Attorney General Chambers. Deeply inspired, they are here to pay it forward. Thank you, Prof. Woon and Mr. Faisal, for joining us today, and good afternoon to you, you both. It's good to have you here. So let's just jump right into it. I'm sure everyone here is curious about, your growing up experiences and your experiences in NUS as well. Maybe you both can start by sharing with us, how was growing up in your family like, and how did your family play a role in shaping your values and belief system? Professor Woon, maybe you would like to start us off?
Well, this was half a century ago, which is a lifetime or more for most of you. My parents were both school teachers. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. And my father was basically the sole earner because my mother took early retirement. There were, let me see, there were my two grandparents, there were my parents, there were three of us, so that's 7 people in the household, plus the dogs, the chickens, the ducks, a few other miscellaneous creatures. Growing up in the 60s, I mean, it was a happy family. I was surrounded by books. My father was a bibliophile. I've inherited most of his books. Unfortunately, I had to throw away a lot of them because of no space. Surrounded with books. When television came in, and I'm old enough to remember when television came in, we had a television. But before that, we listened to the radio. Right? So I was surrounded basically by educators, books, and media. That's what I grew up with.
So, Prof. Woon, I've also read that, there were some very memorable father-son moments, and your father actually played a very important role in your giving back journey. So maybe you can share with us what are some of the best lessons that you've learned from your dad, or even some of the things that your dad imparted to you along the way.
I mean, as a parent, you don't go around lecturing your children, not unless you want to bore them to death. So he didn't do that. I mean, he talked. He was not a great talker, but he did share his experiences of when he was growing up during the Japanese occupation. And many of these experiences and anecdotes found their way into the novels that I wrote. So he also was interested in military history, and that's where I picked up my interest in military history. My parents were not the kind of helicopter parents that looked over our shoulders and say, "Oh, are you doing well or not doing well?" We were pretty much left to ourselves. We were really left to ourselves to grow up. But my dad did bother. He turned up at Founders Day when I won prizes. He turned up, and that was important. Just being there. You know, that generation didn't really talk. Not really the kind of touchy-feely parents nowadays. They're much more Victorian, well, not really Victorian, but more conservative, less demonstrative form. But there, nonetheless, a happy childhood.
That's great to hear, Prof. Woon. Mr. Faisal, maybe you can share with us as well, how was your growing up years like? Was it similar to Prof. Woon's experience as well?
I suppose it is similar in some ways and slightly distinct in others. It was a very happy childhood as well. And I was very fortunate to be raised by parents who, despite not always having the opportunities to pursue further education due to the financial realities of the day, were nonetheless deeply passionate in trying to make sure that their children got the opportunities that they never had. So they always value the importance of an education, much like many families in the day. And they saved up religiously for education, as they saw it as a means for their children to move up the social mobility ladder. But at the same time, I think they were an inspiration in different ways as well. Because even in circumstances where finances were tight, they always impressed upon us, not by way of words, but by way of example, about the need to give back to society. Not necessarily in big, ostentatious ways, but in deeply meaningful ways. So I remember when I was young, for example, my father would help out in the mosque. My father would help people who had difficulties with their jobs, with getting housing to meet their elected representatives. They would donate food to the less fortunate. My mom, who's able to read English, would help third parties read the letters that are sent to them because they might not have an understanding of the English language. So in these small but very meaningful ways, they served as an inspiration, leading by example, I think, of the importance of helping others in whatever ways, big or small, because not everyone obviously at that point of time can support others financially, but through their examples, they showed that we all are in this together, we all have to help one another.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal, for sharing. I think, as what you've both said, parents play a very important role in shaping, our minds at such a young age, and also what we do for the future as well. Maybe we can go into a bit about your NUS experiences, as you both were from NUS. Maybe many moons ago, but we would love to hear about how your NUS experiences shaped you, and maybe you can describe your journey in the law faculty at NUS and how you came to study at NUS, and if you received any scholarships. Or maybe we can start with Mr. Faisal. How was your journey like into the law faculty?
My journey in the law faculty was an extremely positive one. The 4 years of legal education that I received at NUS, as well as the CCAs that I were involved in, were all immensely challenging and enjoyable in equal respects. Having said that, as I think I alluded to earlier, there were some financial issues. While I saved up most of my allowances from national service, I did some part-time work here and there. I saved up allowances from internships and tried to save up where I can. Finances were still quite tight. So I was extremely blessed to have received considerable financial support as a university student, to a mix of awards and scholarships as a result of my academic performance. But also, I think quite importantly, needs-based bursaries and loans. And all of that, to be honest, put together made a world of difference for me. I especially recall my third year in law school. where I received an unsolicited phone call from the deanery in NUS Law, indicating that they had, on their own volition, raised my background to a law firm who was seeking to help law students. And the law firm, upon hearing my story, decided to defray some of my expenses in the form of a merit-based award, no strings attached. Now, that to me sort of underscored the fact that there are so many helping hands in the form of each of these forms of assistance, and that is a large part of who I am today and why I'm in the privileged position of being able to help others today. I'm not conceited enough to believe that what I've achieved I deserve through my own efforts. It's really informed by the opportunities that I've been given by such well-meaning individuals and companies. So that does sort of impress upon me the need to pay it forward, to do what I can to help the less fortunate. So my time in NUS has been deeply meaningful, and it, to a large extent, informs my own philosophy for giving back today.
Mr. Faisal, I completely agree with you about where we are today. It's because of these donors as well. Having received a scholarship myself, I think a lot of what is me today and what I've achieved is because of all the generous donations that I've received over the years from many donors as well. For my personal situation, I remember my mom being extremely, satisfied and very, very happy that I got a scholarship because it really eased the financial burden on our family. Maybe you can share with us, how was it like when you were awarded your scholarships and, the different help that came to you? How did your parents feel about it, and how did your family feel about it as well?
It was certainly something that my family was very happy about. It obviously took a lot of burden away financially. But to a large extent, it also served as a recognition of the fact that that's just the start of the journey. When you are given an opportunity, it's not really just about taking that opportunity and using it to your advantage. It's about thinking about how that opportunity can in future bless others as well. So that, to a large extent, I think is how we should view such opportunities, such gifts that we've been given.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Professor Woon, maybe you can share with us how your NUS experience was like, and also if you received any help along the way as well.
Well, I didn't plan on reading law. I applied for PSC scholarship for BizEd and was granted it provisionally to read in an English university. But something went wrong with my A-levels, which has left me with an abiding suspicion of examinations. Actually, it was my best subject, but that's a different story. But I persevered, and I got a DBS scholarship from the DBS Bank. And the chairman of the interview committee looked at my results and he said, well, you might do well in law. I said, fine, if you want to give me a scholarship, I'll read law. And that's how I ended up in law. It was helpful because my father, as I said, was by that time the sole earner. And he still had all of us to support. My brother's only a year younger than me, and he was in university in dentistry at the same time. So having two of us in university would have been, I think, a bit of a strain. Not that he ever complained, right? So when I got the scholarship, that's fine. It also relieved my mother of the necessity of giving me an allowance, because by that time she was on pension, having taken early retirement. So the DBS scholarship was good. And then when I was in university, again, I didn't plan to go to university. I was supposed to go to the bank, but I did well enough so that the university said, okay, why don't you join us? And the vice chancellor of the university happened to be married to the senior vice president of DBS. So a deal was made and I was transferred lock, stock and barrel to the university. And I got a scholarship to attend Cambridge University. Without that scholarship, I wouldn't have gone. And as I tell my students, go to Cambridge if you can. Being there is the education, doesn't matter what you learn. So all of the, when I was in RI, I did well enough, so they remitted my school fees. I got the Guthrie scholarship. So practically the whole of my academic life, somebody else had been paying for my education, all of which relieved my parents from the burden of paying for this. They could concentrate on paying for my brother.
Thanks, Prof. Woon, for sharing this with us. I would also like to ask the both of you if you have met any of the donors of your scholarship or the help that you've received over the years, and if so, what was the experience like meeting, your donors and the people who actually helped you pursue the education? Maybe Mr. Faisal, you can start us off first.
I have only met one donor of the different scholarships that I've received. And that was a very enriching experience, being able to tell them firsthand the impact of the help that I've been given by them. But I do make it a point to write a letter of thanks to every single donor who has shaped me in some way or other. So every award that I get, every scholarship that I get, I do write a letter to them, and invariably they will write back, just to express their thanks at the letter and to acknowledge the impact that it has. And I think it is important to have that conversation with the donor, so that they fully understand just how significant that contribution is to your personal development.
Yes, I agree, Mr. Faisal. I think receiving the Yale NUS scholarship, we were also, they asked us to also write a letter of thanks to our donors. And I think through that, it was very important for me because it was the first time I sat down and actually wrote down what this meant to me, like receiving the scholarship, what it meant to me. And I think it's very important for the donors to also put a name and a face, because they added my picture in the letter as well. So a face to who they're giving to. I think that makes it all the more personal, and they know that their money is going somewhere to help someone also. And I personally feel that whatever you've said just now also resonated with me. Whatever has been given to me, I hope to be able to give back as well in the future, and to be able to do that for someone, to make their educational dreams come true as well. Prof. Woon, how about you? Have you met any of the donors of your scholarships that you've received?
Well, there were corporate scholarships. Guthrie, basically it's an English company. DBS is a bank. The Commonwealth Secretary. I mean, I met the people who administered the scholarship, but not the donors themselves. But yes, I have had an experience where someone actually thanked me for something I'd given. So I used to give money to Boys Town. And recently one of these people wrote to me and said that it made a difference to him, because if people go to Boys Town if they don't have an entirely happy home life. And he went to Australia. He turned his life around. He came back and he wrote. He said, "Thank you." And it was touching to know that it actually had made a difference to someone.
Yes, Prof. Woon. I think as a donor, I think that is very important to hear from the people that you donate to.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that make you believe even more in what you're doing as well, Maybe we can move on to talking about, both of you have lectured in NUS. Prof. Woon, you are in the Faculty of Law right now, and Mr. Faisal, you are an adjunct lecturer. Maybe you can share with us some of the experiences coming back to NUS after having studied there, and after so many years, what do you enjoy about teaching at NUS and, as an educator? Mr. Faisal?
I suppose education to me is a massive social leveler, as my own experience suggests. And I've always been interested in education. I've been involved since graduation in many teaching initiatives, not just at NUS Law, like you highlighted, but with the Singapore Academy of Law, with SMU, with the Singapore Institute of Legal Education, which is under the leadership, of course, of Professor Woon, and the Singapore Mediation Center. I think there are a whole host of reasons why I decided to teach. It's partly the love of the intellectual exercise that teaching represents. Another part of it, of course, are the wonderful opportunities for interactions with members of the next generation, people like yourself. And finally, the last part really is about giving back and making a difference to the next generation.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Prof. Woon, as an educator, will you please share with us why you decided to, give back to the education, to the law faculty as well, coming back as an professor?
Well, as an accidental academic, as I explained, I left the faculty on secondment, first to become an ambassador, later to Solicitor General, Attorney General. And after I stepped down, I had a choice between going to private practice or coming back to what I call my natural habitat. And I chose to come back to my natural habitat mean, practice is a lot more lucrative, there's no doubt about it, but you're only helping a very small number of people. And it's a profession. Law is a profession, law is not a business, right? It shouldn't be seen as, it's a profession. If we don't train the next generation, who's going to? We can't leave it to bureaucrats to do this. And that's why I think that it's great that people like Faisal come back and share his experience. There are too many courses in the law schools all over the world are purely academic. They teach you theory, they don't teach you how to function in the real world. So I thought we really need to prepare our students for the real world, not to clone ourselves. A lot of academics just want to clone themselves. We shouldn't clone ourselves. So it's not just law school, it was also the SILE, and whatever else that I can do to pass on what I have learned. So your generation doesn't have to learn it from scratch. You can pick it up and then hopefully you pass it on. It's hopefully going to be an exponential thing, right? People like Faisal. Faisal, it's great that you're doing this. Inject a sense of reality into what is being taught. And the students will benefit and AG's chambers will benefit. They'll have better material to work with. The law firms will benefit. They will have better material to work with. Singapore will benefit because when we increase the skills of the legal profession, we attract business. Good for everyone.
Thank you, Prof. Woon. So speaking of passing it on to the next generation, can we just know what made you decide to give your first gift? As both of you have given like bursaries to NUS, with Prof. Woon having 2 bursaries with NUS, and Mr. Faisal, you even set up the Phoenix Grant as well. So maybe you can share with us what made you decide to take this step and give back. Prof. Woon, please.
Well, I know how difficult it is as a student to cope with the burden that law school puts on you, right? So, you know, I've had people literally break down in tears in my office because of the pressures. And the last thing I wanted is to see people worrying not just about the academic pressures, but where's the money coming from? You see, scholarship, there are a lot of scholarships. If you're bright, you're going to get scholarships. There are people who will line up to give you money. But there are people who are not at the top academically and still have a need, which is why I chose to give a bursary. It's bursary rather than a scholarship for those who need the money. Don't forget, the people who come into our university, NUS, are the top 5%. So they're not stupid people. And students sometimes have to be reminded, you may be at the bottom of the class, but you're not stupid. But these are people who could have who might need a little leg up. Their parents might need a little leg up. This is not fair. Parents in Singapore will sacrifice to put their children through school. And if we can't relieve that burden a bit, I would say, well, let's do what we can. And I also wanted, as a personal thing, to commemorate my father. So the first one is in memory of my father. And the second one is in memory of my grandfather.
Thank you, Prof. Woon, for sharing. Mr. Faisal, was it in a similar vein they decided to also, start giving back to NUS and to a secondary school as well, right?
Yes, very much so. I think Prof. Woon put it much more eloquently than I could. But the Phoenix Grant that you mentioned, Janelle, is my first structured financial gift to NUS. But it is one of a few different scholarship grants and funding programs that I started since graduation in a variety of institutions. And to a large extent, a lot of it's informed by my own learned experiences, much like Prof. Woon's experiences with some students. For me, I attended neighborhood schools the entire way before entering university. And in the course of that journey, you do see firsthand the realities that so many people don't get the opportunities that I did. And all of those experiences informed my belief that, I have to then pay it forward. I have to serve as that bridge, as it were. So almost immediately after graduation, I decided to start a first funding or scholarship program in a secondary school for lower income, higher potential students. And I've done the same in a junior college as well, with a similar context and a similar program. And I've done the same as well in a special needs school to promote visual arts education. And so in 2014, I approached NUS Law the dean and told him, look, let's have a discussion on how I can give back in a small but hopefully impactful way. And it was in that context that we devised the Phoenix Grant, which is a book grant for lower income law students. And of course, it is my hope that those students, when they go out there, when they are successful, they will then pay it forward to the next generation as well.
So what impact do you hope to see with your gifts or your dreams for the community, as you both have given back to the community in both in NUS and other faculties as well, and other colleges as well? What do you hope to see as the outcome of these gifts that you've been giving? Mr. Faisal, would you like to share with us?
Sure. And I will cheat a little at this juncture because it's an answer I've given in another interview, but I think it is an answer that still applies. I think the measure of success in thinking about giving back is to ask yourself whether in 10 years, 15 years from now, instead of you interviewing me, one of the recipients of my scholarship of Prof. Woon's grants or bursaries is sitting here in this sort of platform, talking about how 10 years, 15 years ago, Professor Woon assisted him to get to where he needed to be, or I assisted him to get to where he needed to be. And that's why he's talking to the next host of this show or program, because he himself then started to devise a scholarship or a bursary or some sort of financial aid program to help the next generation because he wants to pay it forward. I think it goes back to Professor Woon's point earlier about exponential outcomes, and it's really something I personally want to see in programs like this.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. I think that's a great measure and a great way to see the success of your giving back. Prof. Woon, as you have children, is there anything that you impart to them in terms of teaching them how to pay it forward? Or do they ask you anything about, the bursaries that you give out?
No, so far, I don't think they've disbursed anything yet. But, I don't have anything to add to Faisal. And Faisal said it all. I don't have anything to say. Yeah, but apart from anything else, because they're law students, whoever gets the bursary, I will invite them to come and talk to me anytime about anything, right? Shoes and ships and sealing wax, cabbages and kings, whatever they want. Because the idea is not just give money. The idea is to help people. And if they learn from that to help other people, then yes, we've done something good.
Thank you, Prof. Woon. So you've both given back to various organizations, not just NUS. So what do you think is the importance of in alumni giving back to their alma mater and also giving back wider to the wider community as well? Do you think they should just focus on giving back to their alma mater because it has given them so much, or do you think that, they should look at the needs of the community as well? Mr. Faisal?
I think it's a mix. Certainly, given how much I have received from my education in NUS, I felt almost duty bound, as it were, to do something for the next generation, to do something for the next batch of students at NUS. But certainly, doing things for the community is also going to be very important. And so there's an important role, I think, for not only alumni, but for private donors more generally. The government has done, I think, a good job in leading Singapore, but it really can't be all things to all people. It's going to be impossible really for any government to take care of every single need of every single individual. And the nature of governance is that there will always be blind spots. There will always be areas that are underemphasized, underfunded. They may need more focus, for example. And it's important for all of us when we see things that we have a power to make a difference in, that we fill those gaps, that we use our influence and voice to effect that positive change. So much like Prof. Woon highlighted how some of his experiences are informed, I think, by some of the students coming to him having financial challenges. Some of my own experiences have been informed by knowing people who didn't get to where they needed to be because of financial challenges. Each of us has to ask ourselves, how can we make that difference? What do we know about society? What do we know about those gaps? And to see how we can fit those needs, not necessarily financially, but to do something in our power to make that difference.
Yes, Mr. Faisal, thank you for sharing. I would just like to also ask you, how do you think, we all agree that yes, giving back is very important, but how do you think we can ensure that this paying forward culture is strongly entrenched in our next generation and even in the wider community in Singapore? Because I think there's still a sense of, maybe the government should help you, or maybe you can look at other resources, but not private donors. So how do you think we can encourage private donors to come forward and give back? Prof, feel free to step in as well if you have anything to share with us.
Well, the alumni are your logical pool. And basically, if you had a good experience, you want others to have a good experience too, right? So for example, Cambridge, my old college, St. John's, set up the St. John's Award, and I helped do that. We collect money. The award goes to students who attend Cambridge, St. John's College specifically. My son, one of my sons, went to the same college, so both of us have donated to the St. John's Award. And I met the people to whom we gave the awards because I'm on that interview committee. And you know, they're not rich people. They're people whose parents would sacrifice to send them to Cambridge. It's not cheap. So what we do gives them that experience, which makes them hopefully better people, right? Should we leave this to the government? There's some people of a socialist bent who say, well, let's leave it to the government. But why leave it to the government? It comes, you know, taxes. Taxes come from people too. Private generosity can be much more targeted than public generosity. And there are a lot of other things, other calls on the public purse, especially now with the pandemic raging. Those who can afford, even if it's a small way, should help if they can. You don't have to give millions. Small donations, which is what, you know, I don't give millions. Small amount is enough.
Thank you, Prof. Mr. Faisal, do you have anything else to add on to that?
I would agree entirely with Prof. Woon's observations. The other additional point I would add relates to the fact that it's not even really about money at times. So those who can't, for example, donate finances can always donate in the form of time, to volunteer, as Janelle, you did, for example, such that we then end up in a situation where it's not really just about thinking about finances per se, but more thinking about how each of us is contributing to this entire ecosystem that we call Singapore.
Right. Janelle's back on.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, I don't know why it went off. Thank you, Mr. Faisal and Prof. Woon. I think we can now move to the questions from the audience. The first question is from Denise, who is asking, what would you say to the public who say that financial aid for needy students is the responsibility of the government? Maybe Prof. Woon or Mr. Faisal, feel free to just jump in.
I think I already mentioned that yeah, it's a supplement. Don't leave it all to the government. You know, when you say leave it to the government, it's an abdication of personal responsibility. It's saying, I don't have any responsibility to my fellow citizens or to my fellow human beings. Let the government do it. Take responsibility for helping others, for goodness sake.
I would entirely echo Prof. Woon's views on that. It doesn't mean, obviously, the government can't do things. The government should, obviously. But really, at the end of the day, there are going to be so many blind spots in any society. There are going to be so many areas in which there might be an underemphasis that might deserve more focus. And realistically, the government, like I mentioned earlier, can't be all things to all people. So it is important when we see areas in which we can help, whether financially, whether by way of volunteer work, whether by way of advocacy, we do that. We be the change that we want to see in society rather than expecting someone else to do that work.
I think Andrew from the audience has also asked the same question, but he's further asked, what would you say to convince these potential donors to come and support the students at the university? Mr.
So I would say don't write them begging letters every now and then. It just turns people off. It's, you know, in the case of St. John's, we wrote personally to all the alumni. The response was not great, but it's the personal touch. Universities write a corporate letter. It's run off on a printer. It's very impersonal. I don't think the university per se should be doing this. You round up a few of your influential alumni, ask them to spread the word. Example is always the best.
I would agree entirely with Professor Woon. I think stories and narratives are extremely important. Otherwise, it just ends up being a lot of digits, a lot of figures, which doesn't actually resonate. And I recall, for example, when I was helping out in a character education, I'm not sure of the exact phraseology, but I think it's a character EduSafe award. And one of the individuals who came before me was suffering from cancer. And yet he was up for an award because he was one of the top students in his class, which was just an amazing and powerful narrative. And immediately when you see something like that, you feel compelled to act, you feel compelled to help. And immediately we got a fund up in order to assist him to finance his education. Why? Because his story resonates. If the story ultimately is $5,000 goes to the school, it's hard to envision what the impact is. As much as this individual is working hard, this individual deserves a leg up, this individual deserves to be supported. And invariably, when you hear those sort of powerful narratives, people will be persuaded that they have a place in helping that individual.
Yes, Mr. Faisal, I completely agree that the personal touch is very important. Now, moving on to the next question from Mr. Wilbur Nung. He says, thank you for sharing. And he's asking, as you know, paying forward might not be that prominent in Singapore compared to some of the Western countries. So what do you think we can do to motivate more individuals to open up their minds and give back more frequently? I think he's asking in the context of Singapore specifically, what can we do?
I don't think that's right. It's not, in other countries, they make a big splash about giving this, giving that. But here, as far as I can see, people are much more reticent about blowing their trumpets and saying, look how generous I am. I'm giving this money. When you read in the newspapers, for example, somebody gets involved in an accident, people are generous. Whether he's a foreign worker, a housewife who gets hit by someone riding a personal mobility device, people are generous. But as Faisal says, you don't ask as an institution. If you ask as an institution and say, give to NUS, they'll say, well, NUS is rich, the government's job to finance NUS. You say, look, there are people who are in need. I don't think we are being fair to us fellow Singaporeans to say they're not generous. They're not stupidly generous, and they're not the kind who will yell around, yell, say, see how much I'm giving. You need to tap into that altruism, and that altruism is there. And I think your generation is more altruistic than my generation, because my generation and my father's generation were more concerned with getting food on the table. Now you have the expectation of inheritance. You can afford to be more generous to others.
So I think that's a great segue to the next question from Ms. Jessica Chow, who's asking both the speakers, when you look at the younger generations today, how hopeful are you that we are becoming a more caring society? Or do you think there are increasing challenges, especially during challenging times like COVID-19? Prof. Woon?
I'm optimistic. I've been in this game for a long time, 40 years almost. Right? The students that I have are a lot better than the students in my year. Hey, take it from me, I'm not flattering you a lot. They're also more engaged. They're also more socially conscious. It is hopeful. It is hopeful. They're not just concerned about getting a job, making a ton of money. I think, well, I may be wrong, but my impression is that that's not the obsession of your generation. As I said, there's an expectation of inheritance on the part of many of them, and they can afford to say, look, we don't have to worry about our parents now, or supporting our parents in their old age. We don't have to worry too much about our own old age, but there are causes in the world, good causes, people who need help. I think your generation's much more attuned to that. than my generation ever was.
Thank you, Prof. Woon. I think it's very encouraging to hear that from someone coming from an older generation, especially since many a times our generation has been termed the strawberry generation.
Yes.
Mr. Faisal, what are your thoughts on this? Do you expect to see any challenges with, fostering a more caring society, especially during COVID-19 and, what's to come in the future?
I would entirely agree. I know I've said this before, but I entirely agree with Prof. Wood. And I think one useful way to look at it is that COVID-19 is obviously a challenging time. But one silver lining with COVID-19 is that you see so many people going out, finding underserved needs, and doing their best to serve it. That itself is a reflection of just how committed this next generation is to making Singapore a better place. And the very fact that you've got so many people stepping forward, so many people volunteering, that suggests that once we get past the pandemic, these are individuals who care about society, who want to make a difference. And it augurs well, I think, for the next generation. Far too often people say, like what you mentioned, Janelle, that this is a strawberry generation. But the way I look at it is that this is a generation with options, but who nonetheless are looking out for others, who nonetheless want to be involved in initiatives that may not necessarily pay well, but it helps to serve others. That should be a good reflection of just how caring a society it is. And much like Professor Woon, I suppose the correct word is optimistic. I'm very optimistic of the next generation.
That's great to hear. I have a comment here, not really a question, from Mr. Chandra. I would just like to hear maybe your thoughts on it. He says, volunteerism comes in many forms. It might be helpful if each graduating class can appoint 2 or 3 volunteers to organize their respective cohorts to do pro bono work, including giving talks, mentoring, and getting students to do practical training, etc. And also raising funds for the faculty, for the university, and for the community at large, especially for the needy. Do you have any thoughts on what Mr. Chandra has said?
Chandra was president of Law Society, I think, right? Am I right, Chandra? Yes. Forced pro bono work. Okay, yes, all of you got to do pro bono work, whether you like it or not. The problem is finding meaningful pro bono work. Meaningful. Whenever we renew our practicing certs, we have to tick the boxes. How much pro bono work can you do? And it depends. I mean, you're doing family law, you're doing criminal law, the scope of pro bono work, there's a lot of scope. You're doing corporate deals, mergers and acquisitions. You want to do pro bono work for billionaires? It's a bit tough, right? So, but having said that, I don't think you can organize pro bono work. It comes from this is something that you learn, you imbibe from your parents, your friends, your environment. You can't force it out of people. Right? Organizers are fine, right? But you can't force people. Anyone who's worked in an organization, there's always only a few that you can count on. These are the ones who will try and spark the others. But most of the others, you'd be lucky if you get half of them to join your bandwagon. Right? So, yeah, give it a go. If it works, tell us, what's the magic formula?
Okay, we have a question from Ivy. It says, my question is for Janelle. What is your thought process of students of your generation in giving back to education, especially to NUS? Is it deemed a sexy cause to give back to? Prof. Woon and Mr. Faisal, feel free to jump in, but I personally feel even if the motivations behind giving back may be because, it's a sexy cause, let's just do it because everyone else is doing it, I don't think it matters because still the money is going somewhere, the help is going somewhere, and the person who receives the help can still benefit from it. But that's my personal view. What do Mr. Faisal and Prof. Woon, what do you think about this?
I think that actually is a good way to look at it. It's going to be challenging to always ask what is the motivation of an individual in giving back. And
there were some cases, right? Which this
one
I give you.
Okay, I think I had some technical issue there. So in my mind, at the end of the day, it really should be about outcomes. If somebody wants to give back, then it really should not be about asking about what the person's motivations might be. Why does the person want to give back? It's really about, well, if you want to help the next generation, do it. And even if someone comes in with less than benign intentions, and it's hard to think of why that might be, but even if that's the case, when you get that letter from a student saying, thank you for helping me, this is the impact, how can one not be moved to help further? And why is that necessarily a bad outcome? So that, I suppose, is my perspective on it.
Thanks, Mr. Faisal. Prof, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, giving back doesn't necessarily mean money. I mean, at the start of your career, you probably don't have that much in terms of money to give back. But just talking about the legal profession, there's nothing to stop you from coming back and mentoring students, tutoring students, counseling students, sharing your experience. All of these things I hope would be valuable. I can't presume to speak for students what they would want, but I imagine that having someone to talk to, someone to ask questions to might be useful, valuable, especially when students are under pressure. And I don't know, as I said, I can't speak for you, not for your generation.
Okay, we have one more question from, I'm so sorry if I'm butchering your name, but Ijin C. He asks, how can we inculcate a greater sense of gratitude amongst the younger generation to foster the spirit of paying forward? Mr. Faisal?
I think it's hard to force any mindset shift in terms of telling people you've got to be thankful, you've got to have gratitude at certain opportunities that you get. It really is a mindset shift. It really is about getting those opportunities, thinking about it, and then realizing that at the end of the day, where you are at the moment is less a function of the work that you did and more a function of the opportunities that you got. And then it becomes one of those things that you reflect on and you realize that, hang on a minute, that means I then need to offer my shoulder to make sure the next generation has the opportunities that they deserve to have. So really it's less of any enforcement of any policy, but really creating an environment where people start asking these questions, because it's not about giving them the answer, it's really about helping equip them with the tools such that they can get those answers.
Thanks, Mr. Faisal. I have just one more question from Jordan. I'm so sorry, we're running out of time, so I'll just take one last question. Jordan says, should society be more gracious to support foreign students who are in need too while studying in Singapore? Prof. Woon, maybe you can share some of your thoughts on this.
If we had unlimited resources, then the answer would be absolutely yes. If on the other hand, there has to be prioritization, then we need to work out a scheme of priorities. And the scheme of priorities logically would be our own people first before foreigners. But can I just add one thing to what Faisal said about gratitude? I entirely agree with him. You can't force gratitude. But you know, it's a sense of entitlement. If the government gives money to students or to anyone, they have a sense of entitlement. They don't feel grateful. So, well, I'm entitled to this. So having that personal connection with the donor, I think, is important. If you know the donor has given you money, I think it's much more likely there will be a sense of gratitude. But a donor who gives it in order to get gratitude is going to be disappointed. It's a bonus. When you give and somebody says, it helped, then you feel good. If you give to NUS, it's a big impersonal organization. But when you give to someone, and this point was made by Faisal before, give to someone, and that someone says, it changed my life, both sides benefit. There's a psychological benefit for both sides.
Thank you, Prof. Woon. As we come to the closing questions, I would just like to ask both our speakers today, do you have a message or advice for current students, and what are your hopes for them? Maybe we can start with Mr. Faisal. What are your hopes for the current students?
Sure. I think a lot of what has been said to me resonates insofar as this is a generation that Prof. Woon highlighted earlier with options. This is a generation with opportunity, but this is also clearly a generation, if you ask me at least, with a heart. And it's about looking for what you're passionate about, what you feel strongly about, and making a difference in that area. Janelle, you earlier mentioned about helping out in a sexy area, for example. That's all well and good, but the reality of it is people are not going to be passionate about doing it 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in a row if what they're doing it is because they want something on their CV, as an example. But if they are passionate about it, if they genuinely believe in it, those efforts will come. It will be a privilege to give back, and it won't be a chore. But it's important for all of us to ask about what do we feel passionate about, what voices do we want to amplify, because all of us in this audience is equipped with a university education, presumably, whether lawyers or otherwise. We are in an immensely privileged position to give back, whether in the form of financial support, to serve as mentors, as Professor Woon suggested, or to give next generation the opportunities that they need. So it's for us to ask those questions and to think about what we're passionate about and to make a difference in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Prof. Woon, do you have a message for current students?
Well, basically, you know, you go to university, you are in a privileged position, and you earned the place. This is why I say, you know, if you just give the place to any old person, they're not grateful for it. You've earned the place. Think about others, about helping others to earn the place too. I mean, it's not just talking about lawyers. I mean, don't just go out and be a good lawyer. Do the right thing. Being a good lawyer and doing the right thing aren't necessarily inconsistent. I would hope they are consistent things. So if the problem with socialist countries is the abdication of personal responsibility. Everything is pushed in personal government, not my responsibility, not my job. I think those of us who have enjoyed privileges should take the responsibility to help, if we can, in whatever little way, the others who don't enjoy those privileges.
Thank you so much, Prof. Woon. And as we come to the close, I would like to thank Prof. Woon and Mr. Faisal for your sharing and for taking time off your busy schedules to join us today and have this conversation. I think a lot has been said, and it's been really inspiring to hear about your background and your giving experiences as well. With support from donors like yourself, we students can actually focus on our studies and enjoy the full experience of university and college life without having to worry about being able to afford our school fees. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to do so. To our audience, thank you so much for your questions, and we hope you've enjoyed today's webinar and are deeply inspired by both the sharing by Prof. Woon and Mr. Faisal. And we hope that if you want to find out more, you will go on to our email address shown on the screen, and we will send you a link also of the webinar recording after the event as well. Just a side note, your feedback is extremely important to us, so please do scan the QR code shown on the screen for a short survey, and we will also send the link to you via email if you would like to do it there. Thank you for joining us today once again, and we hope that it's been an insightful time for you as it has been for us, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you.